you have inward and outward facing cameras on this train in addition to a data recorder. So the NTSB is going to very quickly be able to get a sense for what happened inside that train cabin, which we didn't have in 188. And those cameras were added after Amtrak 188.
That's what I was going to ask you, if that's a result of, the tragedy that happened in Philadelphia. And are those the only safety measures that have occurred because of the train derailment in Philadelphia?
Yeah, we still don't have positive train control. And now these tracks are not owned by Amtrak. They're going to be owned by a freight rail. So it is that freight rail's responsibility to have the positive train control. And the freight lines have been pushing and lobbying very hard for this deadline to be pushed back. And that's exactly what's happened, is the government has pushed back the deadline for positive train control now a few times. So this should have been something that was in place there. We don't know, of course, if that's going to play a factor in this crash. It's just too early for us to know if positive train control would have been a factor. Right now, in fact, what you're seeing in the video is a triage situation. And if you look, you'll at some point start to see pictures of tents. There'll be red, yellow, and green. Red would be the most critical. Yellow would be, probably broken bones and moderate injuries. And then green are relatively minor injuries or no injury. And so right now it's a triage. It's a rescue operation. We have heard from the police that there are multiple fatalities, that they appear to all be on the train.
Yeah.
We also know that this train struck cars on Interstate 5 as it derailed. So there are injuries there as well.
Yeah, in some of the video you can see the vehicles on the highway sort of tossed to the side. At least the one car that's closest to the ground, to the highway, looks utterly destroyed. We spoke to a passenger on this train earlier, and he mentioned this once, and I haven't heard this anywhere else. He said that this train was already running about a half hour late when it picked him up at the New Tacoma train station. What can you tell us, Chris, about this train? Because this was its sort of inaugural run.
These trains were fairly new. And while the trains, this was a next generation vehicle, I'm told, according to the Department of Transportation. It would have had some levels of onboard positive train control, at least be capable of it. We don't know if it's active on those tracks yet, although most of the freight rails are not fully compliant there. And that this would have had some additional crash protection. What it wouldn't have had was seatbelts. And that was a big debate after Amtrak 188 was, should there be seatbelts on board trains? Because a lot of the injuries that were suffered in Amtrak 188 were due to people getting thrown around and their bags getting thrown around. So, that's perhaps why you're going to see a lot of broken bones and things, is because once those trains left the track, people are getting flung about the interior of that train. You'll hear that question come up. Would seatbelts make a difference here? And you're going to have, look, you've got a tremendous amount of force that goes into an accident like this. When a train leaves the tracks, and particularly goes flying down, 10, 15 feet onto the ground, there's going to be some catastrophic injuries, and sadly we have heard that to be the case here. But that'll be a question for the NTSB, is what more could be done here, particularly when you're looking at what is relatively a new train that should be on the high end of crash protection, that should have some of these technologies in place that should work in the favor of safety. And that could be why you see so many people gathered in the green and yellow tents in some of this video we've been seeing that have suffered relatively minor injuries, given how catastrophic looking that crash is.
Yeah, it's very true. And I know sort of part of the counter argument is that precisely in a situation like this, if people were sort of stuck in their seatbelts, perhaps they wouldn't be able to get out. When you're hanging upside down or to the side, you might not know how to unhook yourself from a seatbelt. But you're right. It's an ongoing debate about whether or not seatbelts are necessary in these sort of public transportation environments, whether it's a bus or a train. So there are multiple companies, multiple agencies, I presume, that oversee rail travel. You mentioned that the actual tracks are owned by a private company. They're not owned by Amtrak. In fact, most of the tracks that Amtrak travels throughout this country, Amtrak does not own. The NTSB will be investigating, but will there be other governing bodies also investigating this crash?
Yeah, Anne-Marie, the Federal Railroad Administration will send investigators. The NTSB has jurisdiction, so as far as the safety investigation goes, that will be the NTSB. They'll be the lead agency. But the Federal Railroad Administration, part of the Department of Transportation, will also go. Likely the Washington State Department of Transportation will have people involved in the investigation. You're also at least initially going to have somebody look at, was there anything criminal here? So you may see whether it be state police or the FBI take a look. That's pretty routine. You just want to, and you're doing that to rule out anything. You would see that in an airline crash. You'll see that in a train accident. Most likely, it will not be a criminal situation, and it won't be a police matter. But at least initially, you'll have some look at that. And then it's going to be the same painstaking process we watched during Amtrak 188, where they are going to photograph and map the entire accident scene. They're going to recover the black box and the video recorders. They should be able to analyze those fairly quickly here because it doesn't look like the locomotive was terribly badly damaged here. So they should be able to get those relatively quickly. And once you have the video and you have the data recorders, you're going to start to know things like how fast the train was going.
Right.
Was emergency braking added? Could the emergency braking play a factor in the crash? Because that's sort of you get a push-pull thing going there where you're trying to stop an awful lot of weight real quick. Well, that could destabilize the train. All of these things, and you'll be able to know in relatively short order, assuming the cameras were working, what the engineer was doing or not doing. And if there are any, you may be able to even spot an anomaly on the track from the forward-facing camera. If there's a kink in the rail line that just got missed by inspectors the last time it was inspected, and that was the cause, you may see that on the camera. So once you get the NTSB there, and that'll probably take a day, because they're going to fly out from Washington once they officially launch a GO team, and it's virtually assured that they will. So tomorrow, as we get into tomorrow and Wednesday, we're going to start to get some real information about what was going on inside the train at the moment of the crash. Right now, it is more a focus on making sure everyone is accounted for and getting the people that are injured the help they need.
Indeed. I just want to let you know, Chris, and our viewers, that my colleague Tanya Rivera has joined us now to continue with this coverage. We're just getting a little bit of information about traffic in the area that, I-95 will impact traffic for days. Right now, the southbound lanes are closed down, and I imagine there's probably not much happening on the northbound lanes either, because this looks pretty bad. Pretty much all the cars off the tracks with the exception of the engine. And as Chris Van Cleve said, that's kind of fortuitous to a certain degree, because that's where you're going to get the black box, if you will, the camera footage. And now we have two cameras, outward facing and inward facing. So we'll also be able to find out exactly what the engineer was doing at the time. That's basically part of the primary reason for those inward facing cameras, right, Chris? Chris, can you hear me?
Sorry, I'm here. I'm here.
That's okay.
Yeah, those cameras were added after Amtrak 188 because one of the big unanswered questions from that crash is what was happening inside the train cabin. Did the engineer fall asleep? Did he lose situational awareness? Was he not paying attention? We don't know, because he claims to not remember the crash, and there's no way to see inside. So this will give some additional answers. This is something the NTSB has called for a long time, inward-facing cameras. So that will help the investigation. It may not be the proverbial silver bullet that explains this crash. Generally speaking, you have a number of factors. The NTSB just came out with a report a couple of weeks ago, really critical of Amtrak's overall safety culture and how it related to a different accident in Pennsylvania where two workers were struck by a train. So they're going to look at the safety culture inside the Amtrak Cascade line.
And Chris, quick question though. Speaking of Amtrak's safety culture, Do we know if it is Amtrak policy to not do a trial run on a new route like this one?
I don't. I mean, typically you would run a test train when you start a new track, and you're going to train your engineers on the new routing. But certainly the fact that this is a brand new route, that's going to be something they're going to look at. Was the engineer familiar enough with this curve when he or she took it at whatever speed they took it? Did they take it at the right speed?
Right. And at this point, Chris, do we know the status of the engineer or not yet?
We have not heard anything specific about people on board the train, other than we know that there are fatalities, and obviously we know a number of injuries.
So just a little bit more information that we're getting from our affiliate in Seattle, Cairo 7. They're indicating, or at least they're tweeting, that people have been or were trapped inside the derailed train. It certainly looked like in some of the shots like we could actually see people inside one of the cars, but it was difficult to determine whether that was just a reflection of people walking along the road. But Cairo is saying that people were indeed trapped. And just a clarification on the numbers, it seems that there were 70 people who were passengers on the train and 5 people who were crew members on the train. 78 passengers, and 5 crew members on the train. So there you go. We can back to the video that we're showing you what you can see. Great. Here's some video of somebody who's driving past the train, and it gives you an indication of the traffic nightmare that's also unfolding because of this train derailment. You know, I was reading a little bit, Chris, about there were concerns about this train, not derailment concerns, but concerns that this was a new fast train that was traveling in an area where pedestrians may not be expecting it. And some officials had expressed some concerns about this train moving through this area. Chris, I want to just put you on hold because we have somebody who's a passenger on the train. Greg Mukai, is that how you say your name, Greg?
Yeah, I wasn't a passenger on the train. I was driving to work on the highway.
You were driving to work. Okay, tell us what you saw.
You know, everybody was driving to work. It's a busy time of morning, I-5 South. We suddenly had to go from our 60 miles an hour down to 0 as fast as possible, so we were all avoiding one another, trying not to have a collision there. And then after we came to a stop, we looked up to see why we had to do that, and all you saw was smoke, and there's the passenger train hanging from the overpass and on the freeway. So very scary stuff.
I just want to interrupt really quickly because we do have an update on the status of some of the passengers there. This is attributable to Carrie Evans, Communications and Government Affairs Director at CHI Franciscan Health Hospital. A total of 77 patients are being transported right now to hospitals in Pierce and Thurston counties. 4 are considered level red patients with the most severe injuries. The emergency room is fully up and running. Additional doctors and nurses are on site to receive patients. Of course, this will continue. Greg, will let you continue discussing what you saw. Just wanted to update the status there.
Greg, you said that you saw the cars hanging over. From your vantage point, could you see whether or not there were people inside and if they were scrambling to get out and what was happening?
I could not see anybody inside. There was nobody trying to get out or trying to get in at that point when it first occurred. There were several people, especially military personnel, coming off the base nearby that were in their cars coincidentally, and they were rushing towards the incident trying to help. So that was, at the very least, comforting in that moment.
And we had heard that some of the vehicles that were on I-5 were also struck by the cars. Did you see any of that? By the train cars?
There were a couple cars that were traveling on the highway that got struck by the train as it came down. I didn't get too close or see anything. I was trying to stay out of the way. I'm not skilled in first aid or anything.
What was going through your mind when you saw this happening, Greg?
Very, very scary moment. And, it was the first time I'd ever seen a train on that track in the first place. So that was kind of odd, as I was traveling to work. And then to see that is just so unreal. So, yeah, just very scary. Well,
Greg, we're glad that you made it out of there okay. Was this? We understand that this was sort of a new route, a faster route. I mean, what is the morning commute there like for you normally, and for locals?
Well, I mean, in terms of how we get there, I mean, everybody travels on the highway to get south. I live in Puyallup, Washington. I have to travel to Olympia, Washington every morning. It's pretty busy. In the train, like I said, I had never seen it before. It's not typically something I would imagine people take to go south. And this is really sad that it's the first, time they use it, and this is what happens.
Well, we want to thank you for talking to us at a time like this. I'm sure, you want to make sure you're in contact with your loved ones and all that sort of stuff. So, Greg, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
We want to bring in Mark Rosenkirk. He's a former NTSB chair, and he joins me now on the phone. Mark, it's great that you're making yourself available. You're always a wealth of knowledge when it comes to situations like this. So we know a little bit about this train, Mark. We know that it's a new route for this train, that it's characterized as sort of a high-speed train. It was probably going about 80 miles per hour. And at least from some of the aerial views of this track, it looks like it was hitting sort of a mild curve. It looks like a mild curve. That's how I'll describe it. What do all of these things mean to you when you hear this and you hear about the derailment?
Well, we're still very early in the investigative phase, so everything will remain on the table, whether it's a track issue, whether it's a human failure issue, whether it's a signal issue, whether it's a failure, if you will, in the equipment itself, where flanges may have broken off the wheels. We just don't know what happened. It is so early that you have to look at every single item. Remember that accidents are never one thing. They're always a chain of events, which if you take one of the links out, you may, in fact, prevent the accident. So the GO team will be leaving today to go out to the West Coast. They will have a number of people that will be experts in areas like track, signals, the locomotive aspect of it. They'll also be looking at the equipment itself, the cars, the maintenance records. They'll be dealing with the railroad that actually owns the track. That is not Amtrak track. We're talking about only about 500 miles, maybe 600, that Amtrak owns itself. The rest of the 62,000 miles of track is operated by other railroads. So they'll be the railroad that owns this track will be participating in this investigation.
And what about the cars themselves? I mean, we understand at least 7 cars derailed from the tracks, and the emergency doors were not functioning properly. I mean, we look at the pictures of the cars, and they don't look like Amtrak cars. Although, actually, they do have the Amtrak label on them, but they don't look like typical Amtrak cars, what I'm used to seeing here on the East Coast. What can you tell us about those cars specifically?
Well, I don't have a specific age of the rail cars themselves, but the investigators will be looking also at survival factors. When you say that those doors do look like they weren't able to open, it could be that, in fact, they were crushed in a way that prevented them from opening. And, of course, the investigators will learn that and then make recommendations to manufacturers of rail cars to make improvements.
We can't help but to think of the derailment of train 188 in the Philadelphia area in 2015. In that case, there were 5 fatalities, but there were a lot more people on board that train, about 238 or so people aboard that train at the time of the derailment. But, it was a year-long investigation. The engineer could not remember, or testify that he could not remember what happened at the time, whether or not he had seen signals to slow down. And at the time, there was no way to determine whether or not he was telling the truth. They could check his cell phone to see if he was on the phone, and he wasn't, and that was pretty much it. They had to go based on his testimony. Since then, though, there have been some upgrades and some additional safety measures implemented, right?
That is correct, and certainly the event recorder, which is quite similar to what the black box is on an airplane, that will be pulled by the NTSB, brought back to the laboratory, downloaded to get all of the data, which in fact will help them understand what happened. But in addition to that, since that accident, Amtrak has actually installed cameras in the locomotive cab, not only where, in fact, they have been always facing outside, looking down the track, but they now have new cameras which, in fact, are facing inside, looking at the actual operator to see if potentially he was distracted, potentially a medical emergency. We will know when you download all of this video what this engineer was doing. we also will be able to do the interviews and toxicology examination necessary to find out if he was under the influence of anything.
Now, I mean, these sorts of accidents notwithstanding, I guess it's worth noting that Amtrak's accident rate has actually been in decline when you look over the past 40 years. Is that correct, Mark?
That's right, but there was a report that the NTSB did, I guess it was about a month or so ago, where they demonstrated in its report that they believe that Amtrak has a safety culture problem.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, there were issues as it relates to, remember that there was a second accident quite recently after the original 188 accidents where 2 track workers were actually killed. And that was an investigation. When you combine both of them, they really found a number of anomalies in their training programs, in their what we would call crew resource management philosophies. A whole host of issues were uncovered, which, when you put them all together, appears to be a lack of safety.
Yeah, and that was also in the Philadelphia area. That's part of the reason why it was so disturbing. You would think after a major derailment that, you know, things would be tightened up, if you will, that safety protocols would be gone over and people would be adhering to them. You know, you mentioned that the tracks are not owned by Amtrak. And in fact, most of the tracks that Amtrak uses are owned by private companies, freight companies, other rail companies. What sort of obligation are those companies under to maintain those tracks? When you have an upgraded train, don't you also need upgraded tracks?
Depending upon a train that it is. The freight railroads are required by the Federal Railroad Administration to have periodic inspections of their track. It could be as much as 2-3 times a week, depending upon kinds of trains that are running over that track. So the NTSB, when it gets on scene, will be looking to that railroad to provide them maintenance records of their last inspections and what they may have found.
Mark, when you consider the regions of the country, I mean, obviously Amtrak services all areas of the United States. Are there certain regions that you're aware of that have more outdated tracks and equipment than others?
Well, it just depends upon what kind of railroad you're operating with. Many times these are small railroads, short line railroads. They all, just like the FAA when you're dealing with aircraft, have minimum standards that they must adhere to. So the minimums at least have to be sustained in order to be able to continue to keep your certification to operate your train.
All right, Mark Rosenker, former NTSB chair, thank you so much, Mark. I'm sure that we'll be drawing on your expertise again with this story. We want to take everybody to our local affiliate in the Seattle area, Cairo 7. Let's listen into their coverage.
Pierce and Thurston counties. At that point, 4
We're getting
considered level red patients, and that means they have the most severe injuries. And wanted to point out, as we're getting some information from our producer here, this is the Google Earth map that shows you where this happened, and you can see, just if you think about, there's one fortunate aspect of this is that you can see how split the interstate is at that point. So the southbound lanes is where the train came crashing down, and you can see just how far away the northbound lanes are. So if you're looking for positives, that's certainly one aspect, because in some areas of I-5, as you look at the top of the screen, you got I-5 almost next to each other, but fortunately it was at least split and just impacted the one direction of traffic southbound.
In that rural type area, and you can see where the train started to derail then and then came off the tracks and right onto I-5. And again, as John mentioned, yeah, the information I was just handed is that we do know 77 people being transported to hospitals. So that is kind of what I've been talking about with those first responders getting to that scene, and you triage the most injured and try to get them where they need to go to get the care they need right away. And then someone with maybe less severe injuries, they can be taken maybe to a more local hospital, but depending on their injuries, you got to get them where they need to go fast. And 77 people inundating those local hospitals in that area. That is something they're dealing with right now with that mass casualty situation.
Yeah, we know this was the first day officially for the new high-speed service, the new route for this Amtrak Cascades train. And we talked about our Kevin McCarty from Cairo 7, who rode the media ride on this track Friday. So we know at least the train train had gone through the track or gone through the run-through before, but it was today on the first day of official service that it derailed. And NTSB is the federal organization that is going to be investigating this, and this is their tweet they just put out. They're going to be departing from Washington, D.C. today, which begs the question of how long the train is going to be over I-5, because we know that it's a serious investigation. Multiple people killed in this incident. So when you have a situation like that, the investigators really want to get in there and find out what went wrong. Something went clearly terribly wrong. The train derailed right onto I-5. And wanted to bring something up for our Cairo 7 newsroom to look into. As we showed you the video from Friday, we can see just how big the Amtrak Cascades train was. And so I'm curious if we could count the number of cars we can see in that video, because if we can pull up some photos from the crash, what you'll notice is at least 2 train cars on the ground. You have the one car that's dangling from the tracks down onto the interstate. And then as I've looked at these photos, there's the dangling car. We have a other passenger car there that is not on the ground, and then you have the engine on the end. So we got a feel for how big this train was, and we're still trying to really nail down how many cars came crashing down onto the interstate. At least 2, likely more.
Right, and we do know that 78 passengers were on this Amtrak Cascades train this morning. It derailed at 7:45, so more than 2 hours ago. And as you may have heard, if you didn't, I'll repeat it. A short time ago, Pierce County Sheriff Department spokesperson Ed Troyer told us that they are still working the train cars now, and the phone call with him was disconnected when I had asked him if he's aware of anyone still trapped inside. So as you can imagine, that situation 2 hours after this train derailed there this morning in Pierce County at Mounts Road, still working the train cars. We did have confirmed that at least 3 people were dead, but Ed Troyer was not confirming any numbers right now. But we do know that multiple agencies are there helping out in this situation as they triage these patients, try to get them out to the hospital best suited for their injuries. But again, as John was mentioning, those train cars came down on multiple vehicles. But at last word from officials there on scene, no fatalities from the vehicles that were on I-5 southbound in that Mounts Road area.
Yeah, and for context, this was just before 7:45 in the morning, so that is really the height of the morning rush hour commute. This is southbound I-5, which wouldn't be as busy as northbound I-5, but still a lot of vehicles on there. This is from Dupont heading into Olympia to give you perspective of where this happened. So southbound traffic heading toward Olympia, certainly this was what was impacted, and certainly would have been very busy at that time. Vehicles going, 50 to 60 miles per hour. You got a train that was going 80 miles per hour that came crashing down. And we're just taking you through different photos of the scene here. And this is a photo, kind of the wide view from State DOT. Showing you the picture there, just devastating.
And that was our first picture we got in when this first happened this morning. And it's incredible when you look at that picture, almost hard to believe as these train tracks go right over I-5 in those southbound lanes here. We do want to bring in meteorologist Nick Allard joining us with our breaking news coverage. Nick.
I thought we would just cover what exactly we had weather condition wise around the time. It's been a fairly calm couple of hours, but it was breezy to windy overnight. So let me just set the stage with where we were around the time. So I'm going to stop the Cairo 7 pinpoint storm tracker at around that time. So here is 7:44. Now what you can notice here zoomed in very closely is you just have some green. So it's relatively light rain. So I went back and looked up and compared a few different observation stations. We had light rain, in fact, at the one closest to the western end of JBLM. So technically the quote unquote Fort Lewis side of JBLM. And it showed just temperatures in the upper 40s, light rain to almost drizzle at this point. It had been a little bit heavier in the morning, and then wind was really between.
We're going live to the Washington State Police with an update on that Amtrak crash we've been reporting on this morning. Let's listen in.
Updates on that at this point. I'm still trying to get in touch with Amtrak to get a coordinated message, but until I can get in touch with them, I can't release any information.
Did you say it's been difficult to get in touch with Amtrak?
Obviously it is, as you can tell. You can hear my phone going off right now. I'm getting blown up. I'm sure I'm just having a hard time getting in touch with their PIOs. They're probably having a hard time filtering out my phone call versus just media phone calls. So as soon as they can get back to me, I'll get more information.
Where were the injured all taken to?
I don't know that at this time.
What about, is the rescue effort still underway as we speak?
Yes, it is.
So what is happening as you understand it right now?
I can't speak on that. That would have to come from fire. I'm obviously not down at the scene. I don't know what they're doing. I'm sorry. We do have a family reunification center that for people who had family members on the train, we please ask them do not come to the scene, but go to Dupont City Hall, and the family members will be bused there. And they've already taken some buses there.
So are you saying it is possible Southbound I-5 here could be shut down for several days?
I don't believe Southbound I-5 will be shut down for several days, but we will be investigating for several days. The I-5 will be shut down, I would say, probably the good remainder of the day. And we are working with Joint Base Lewis-McChord. Hopefully we can get some other detours going and get people around the base and use some of their access roads.
So as you were hearing from State Patrol that this is still a rescue operation, again, as we've been seeing firefighters on top of those train cars just beyond the trestle where this train derailed, and the investigation itself expected to last several days, and I-5 southbound shut down at least for several hours, if not the remainder of the day. So this is still a very active situation, hearing that it is still a rescue operation getting some people off of this train.
All right, we're going to go back now to our affiliate in Washington, Cairo, with the latest there.
Presumably bringing some of the people off of that Amtrak.
And it looks like we
brought some of the people off. Now, some of the people that we saw.
Rob, we got you now. All right, Rob, your audio is cutting in and out. We're going to work to fix that issue, and we're going to get back to you there. We can see you're at Dupont Hall, and that's where family members are being told to reunite if you did have a loved one that was part of this, because you have the train passengers, 78 passengers on the train, and then you had I-5 rush hour traffic coming right through at that time.
And if you're just joining us, it was over 2 hours ago now that the Amtrak Cascades train that had left Seattle this morning at 6 a.m. left that area. It was, after that, was heading southbound, and this happened at the Mounts Road area where it goes right over I-5 in the Pierce County area. And you're seeing these pictures here on screen, some of our first pictures, and you can maybe make out one of the train cars there below. So at least two on the ground, and then you see the one dangling there. So this could possibly be days that I-5 is affected in this area as this investigation gets underway. The NTSB coming, those are the feds, the National Transportation Safety Board, to begin this investigation, and no word yet on how long those tracks will be closed to any service and how they're going to get the train off of there.
Yeah, a big part of this story is the fact that this was the first day of this new route officially taking off from Seattle to Portland, and the Amtrak Cascades, they rerouted that train. It used to go along the waterfront, and this was an idea to speed up the path, and it was a high-speed train is how it was being touted, going 80 miles per hour in this area. That was the speed limit there. 79 miles per hour is the speed limit of where the crash happened. So we're going to work to find out. NTSB, they'll have to figure out how fast it was going. This is video from the scene there. We know that this would not have been the first time that this train was on the tracks, even though today was the first day of service, because we know our Kevin McCarty from Cairo 7 rode that train on Friday with DOT officials and Amtrak officials because they wanted to show off their new route. This was a day that they had been celebrating and really building up to. Cairo 7's Rob Munoz now has a report, it looks like. Rob, we see you. What can you tell us, and who do you have with you?
We're here with the city administrator for DuPont. This is Ted. Ted is kind of telling us about what was happening here again with some of the people coming off the train. Can you tell us who's being brought here and what are you guys seeing?
Sure. We have the minor and...
Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. Thanks for joining us. Let's bring in Mark Rosenker. He is the former chairman of the NTSB. He joins me now by phone. Mark, first off, what do you make of this accident?
It's very early in this investigative process, so everything is going to remain on the table. We're going to be looking at the track. The NTSB is going to be looking at the cars themselves. They'll first take a look at the engine event recorder, which is like a black box from the aircraft, and they'll have all kinds of data on that particular device. which will enable the investigators to learn more about the speeds if, in fact, the engineer attempted to brake in any way. Lots of information that's going to be coming from that event recorder.
Well,
in addition to that, they've actually got video, dash cam video, which will be looking down the track itself, and also a camera pointed at the engineer inside the cab.
That video will clearly give a lot of information to investigators. Now, how fast does a train have to be going in order to jump the tracks? Or is it not about speed? Is it about the angle of the track and other things?
It's a combination of speed. It's a combination of angles. It's also a possibility of a failure of a piece of equipment. A flange could have broken. A piece of the rail may have split. Lots of things occur in these violent rail accidents. Accidents are never one thing. They're a chain of events, which if you take one of these chains out, you may be able to save the accident from happening. So the NTSB is going to bring in a GO team, which will have a number of professional investigators dealing in track. They'll be also looking at the locomotive. They'll be looking at signals. They'll also be dealing with maintenance. They'll be trying to contact the railroad that owns that track. It's not Amtrak track. They lease that. They rent it for their trains to be able to go over. But the actual owners of the track are probably a freight railroad.
Right. Now, Mark, can you tell us what investigators are doing right now? What are the most time-sensitive elements of this investigation?
Well, an entire crew is going to be coming out, but right now the scene is owned and operated by the first responders at this point. The most important thing you can do is to try to get as many people to the hospitals as quickly as you possibly can in order to be able to save life and limb. The investigators will probably be out there sometime either later this afternoon or this evening. The track will then, of course, the police will have cordoned everything off so that the investigators are going to be able to document the scene. And then, of course, each one of these specific investigative disciplines will begin the work that they're supposed to be doing and focusing on.
Now, we have reports that at least 77 people have been transported to area hospitals. Do you think at this point that there are still victims there in the wreckage who are being removed and rescued?
We don't know that. Obviously, the first responders are going through each and every one of these cars. They're also looking around the cars because sometimes in these violent accidents, people can be ejected from the train. We've seen that before. So there is a methodical, meticulous examination of the scene itself to make sure we get everybody off.
Right.
And also then the investigators will then continue that methodical, meticulous examination for the investigative process.
Right, and we did hear that there were 78 passengers on board as well as 5 crew members. Of course, we don't know if any passerby or drivers on the highway were also injured. It appears as if at least several were.
We don't know exactly, but clearly with a train coming off the track and falling onto a major highway, if in fact nobody died, that is an amazing feat in and of itself. And quite a lucky opportunity. But we do know there were fatalities on board the trains, and that's a terrible thing to have to deal with.
Absolutely. Now, we do also know that this was a high-speed train, 80 miles per hour, we're told it was going. What kind of track maintenance do you need for high-speed trains? Is that different than the kind of track maintenance you need for regular trains?
You have to be looking at it. You'll be looking at the Federal Railroad Administration's regulations as it relates to maintenance periods, when the last maintenance was done, when they did inspection on it. All of those records are held by that freight railroad that owns that track, and the NTSB will be requiring them to give that material up.
So, Mark, what are the most important parts of this investigation to your mind? What is it most important that investigators learn quickly?
Well, they'll be looking at the track to see if there was an anomaly. The video that, in fact, is on the dash cam might show some type of a kink, which could have created the possibility of the derailment at that point. They'll also be interviewing the engineer and the conductors and the trainmen that are part of this particular train. They'll be doing a toxicology investigation to make sure that this crew was not under the influence of any type of a drug or alcohol.
Mark, I'm just going to interrupt you for one moment. Please stay with us, though. I'm going to read a statement from Washington Governor Jay Inslee that just came out. This is his statement on the Amtrak incident today in Pierce County. Today's tragic incident, and I quote, in Pierce County is a serious and ongoing emergency. Trudy and I are holding in our hearts everyone on board and are praying for the many injured. They are our top priority, and I know first responders are doing everything to ensure everyone has the care they need. Everyone should avoid traveling I-5, and WSDOT is working to open alternate routes through the area during the emergency response. This morning I spoke with my cabinet officials, and we are in touch with Amtrak, who we know are working to provide as much information as possible. WSOD will have further updates on Twitter. Those in the area can mark themselves safe with Facebook Safety Check, and I'll be monitoring the situation with our team during the ongoing response. So, Mark, clearly a very active scene there, as we can see from live video, as we can hear from officials, and clearly the traffic there on I-5 is at a total standstill.
Yes, this is, they can't do anything until the NTSB gets there. They cannot begin to disturb the accident scene. Right. But as soon as they have done the documentation, the NTSB is cognizant and recognizes the inconvenience that having this equipment laying on its side and on that highway. So they actually move very quickly once they have actually gotten the amount of information they need. They'll be taking some of these cars and taking them to a secure location to do a much better inspection of them. And the NTSB is on the scene right now, correct? I can't tell you if they are. If it is, it's somebody from one of the regional offices. Right. Typically, the GO team will come out in an airplane, and it will come from Washington. That's where we have a number of our experts located, but we also have some in the regional offices. But wouldn't surprise me. We might see a GO team of anywhere between 10 and 12 people, including survival factors. And what is the chain of command there at this point? There'll be an investigator in charge from the NTSB. There'll be a board member that will come who will act as a spokesman and deal with the political officials as well. All right, Mark Rosenkar, thank you so much for all of that. Earlier, my colleague Anne-Marie Green spoke with a passenger who was on the train when it derailed.
The train was running about a half hour behind, and we left the station at a pretty good clip. The section of the train is the track is supposed to be rated for a maximum speed of 79 miles per hour for this section, and we had just passed the city of Dupont, and it seemed like we were going around a curve, and all of a sudden we felt sort of this rocking and creaking noise, and then all of a sudden it felt like we were heading down a hill, and the next thing that we know, like, we're being slammed into the front of the front of our seats, and the windows are breaking, and then we stop, and there's water that's gushing out of the top of the train, and all the lights go out, and people are screaming.
Water? Where was the water coming from? I'm looking at least one shot there. Is there water in the area?
No, it might have been water that's actually inside the train. It's part of a compartment. I don't know.
Right.
But I mean, it is raining here. I'm not sure what's going on.
Chris, it sounds absolutely terrifying. Now, I had heard that this was this a new train or a new line, a high-speed line?
Yeah, so this was the first run of the train. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. You've been through a lot. I'm just impressed that you're talking to me, period. I know sort of on this coast we have these Acela lines that are kind of fast track trains that go between New York and D.C. Is it something similar?
Right. Yeah, the tracks for this line were supposed to be upgraded to be able to handle higher speeds. I'm not sure what happened at this juncture, but you know that's not something that I know. But there are emergency crews everywhere helping all of the injured.
So you're in the car. It's tossing you about. You're being slammed into the front seat. How do you get out of the car once it comes to a stop?
Yeah. So the emergency doors weren't functioning, and so what we had to use were the we had to remove the strip around the emergency window and then kick the window out and then climb out that way.
And you're climbing out into what? Some of the photos I see, there's obviously Interstate 5, and then it looks like, you know, sort of wilderness or whatever.
So where we were off the side of an embankment, and so we were just getting off into sticks and brush.
And so were there other people that were trapped? Because I'm seeing a car that's basically hanging off of the overpass.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't see that that bit, but I did walk around the train looking for help for an injured person, and I did see a semi that seemed to have been hit.
Again, that was an eyewitness account of the Amtrak trail derailment there in Dupont, Washington. Multiple deaths are reported. We will continue to follow the story and bring you all the latest here on CBSN. For now, we're going to move on to some other news. In just under an hour, President Trump will unveil his national security strategy. In the speech, the president is expected to single out China and Russia as threats to American interests, calling them revisionist powers attempting to erode Americans' security and prosperity. This is a live look where the president will speak. This is the first comprehensive effort by this administration to describe an all-encompassing strategic worldview. A senior administration official says the president will also change long-standing policy to focus more on homeland and economic security. We will take you there live when it begins at 2 p.m. Eastern. Also in Washington this Monday, congressional Republicans are moving full speed ahead to give the president a legislative win before the end of the year. The House is scheduled to vote on a plan to overhaul the U.S. tax system tomorrow, while the Senate is expected to vote on the final bill no later than Wednesday. That means it could be on the president's desk by the end of the week, just in time for Christmas. Joining me now to discuss is Ed O'Keefe. He's a congressional reporter for the Washington Post and CBS News contributor. Hi, Ed. Lawmakers had the weekend to read through this roughly 500-page bill. Are Republicans confident at this point in its passage?
Yes, they are. It looks as if it will pass pretty easily in the House and by a narrower margin in the Senate.